Hey guys, what's up? This is Don and welcome to another Cinema 4D tutorial. This is just a quick one. I want to show you how to use the Reflectance channel to create a shiny metallic texture. So we're just going to start by creating a new material. So just double click here and we can open this. And for those of you who might not be familiar with Reflectance, I mean, it's not that new anymore. So I think a lot of people have at least come across this at some point. But what it is basically, it's the old specular and reflection channel combined into a single channel called Reflectance. And it's now a layer-based shader, which we're going to be looking at shortly. And basically it allows you to do a lot more with your materials. They look better and they can be even more realistic than before. And when you're creating a new material like this, before you change anything, it's actually going to look exactly like it did in previous versions of Cinema, except, you know, just the way it's set up. It's this layer-based system. So let's go to the first layer, which is always going to be there when you create a new material, and it's this default specular. If we scroll down to type, you can see this is called Blend Legacy. And again, this is basically the specular from the old versions of Cinema, except it's inside of Reflectance. The main difference is now that there are different types of specular that you can use for your materials. So if you use the drop down, you can see this entire list. In this quick video, we're only going to be taking a look at the top four, and particularly the GGX type of specular here. But you can scroll through these and just look at the different result that you get from the default values. You can see, for example, that Fong is very similar to Ward and Beckman, but GGX is very different to the other three. And I'm going to be using GGX just because I like the look of it. It kind of has this really sharp highlight in the middle, and then it has this long and gradual fall off. Whereas Beckman, Fong, and Ward, they have a more dramatic fall off and a larger highlight in the center. So this is up to you what you want to experiment with. For this shiny material we're going to be making, we're going to use GGX. And if we continue down the list, you can see there's various controls that you can play around with to see what they do. Roughness is basically the width of the specular. So the smaller the number is, the smaller the highlight is going to be, and it's going to appear a lot sharper. If we quickly apply our texture to our model, let's also go to the color and set this to like a dark gray. So something like this, and you can already see we have this nice highlight on some of these edges. And if we go back to Reflectance and increase the roughness, now you can see that the highlight is getting larger. We also have specular strength, which is basically how strong you want the overall effect to be. So we can crank this all the way up to 100, and you can see it just makes the effect stronger. One thing to note in this new specular system is that these values are very sensitive compared to the old ones. So let me show you what I mean. I can drop down the specular strength all the way down to 1%, and you're still going to see something there. The only time you won't see anything is if it's set to 0. You can even have something like 0.1, and that will give you a result. And even when we render, you'll be able to see this. It's very subtle, but it's definitely there. I'm gonna leave it at 20 for now. We may change it later when we apply other layers. So another thing you will see here is the reflection strength. And this goes back to what I talked about at the beginning, the fact that the specular is now combined with the reflection channel. So we can bump this up to about, say, 50, and in our preview here you can see what that's doing. It basically gives us some reflection, and when we render, you're gonna see this start to look more like that shiny metallic type of texture. Obviously we are now working with blurry reflections, and that just generally means longer render times, but it does look really good. And there you go, we have something like that. So, you know, after only a few steps, we can already have a very good looking material. Okay, so far we've created this material using just one specular layer. And of course, you can have more than one layer. I mean, that's the whole point of this new channel. And I'm going to show you a practical reason why you may want to have more than one layer. In this example, the roughness value here is controlling the width of my specular, but it's also controlling the blurriness of my reflection. You know, the two are linked. And, you know, this might work in some situations, but what if I want to, you know, have a wide specular and not necessarily a blurry reflection? You know, the two are linked right now, and in this setup, there's nothing you can do to separate this. And this is where layers come into play. So what I can do is I can just take off reflection completely away from this layer, and let's just call this specular, just specular on its own. And we're going to add another layer, and we can go to the old school reflection, and we can take down the strength to about 50. Which was the same as the reflection on our specular layer before we took it off. And we can just set the mode to add. So now we have a reflection layer that's not blurry, but we still have our specular layer underneath. And I can change this now to be wider or narrower without also affecting the blurriness of the reflection. So if I put this back down to about 10, and I'm going to leave my reflection at 50. Let's take the specular strength all the way down to 0 on this. So we only want the specular coming from this layer and just the reflection from this layer. And when I hit render, you're going to see that our specular still works exactly the same as it was before. And we also have a nice reflection layered on top of that. And this is the final result. And of course, we can still have some blurriness to this reflection layer, and it doesn't affect the specular of the layer below. And if I hit render, this should look pretty nice. And there you go. We now have the look that we want. There's a lot more to this. For example, if we go to the layer Fresnel, this is on the reflection layer, which I should rename correctly. I can go to the layer Fresnel and let's load up a conductor. And this is the type of function you would use for metals. And there's actually some presets which you can drop down and just pick one of the list here. So let's say aluminium. And this is actually going to be based on real world physical values. And so you're going to get a material which actually behaves like aluminium, you know, in real life. So if you're trying to go for realism, then this is extremely helpful. If your preset isn't listed on this list, you can go to custom, and as long as you can find out what these two numbers are for your particular material, usually a quick Google search will give you this number. So let's say you wanted to do steel, you would just search for steel IOR on Google, and you would get the exact number that you need to use here, and you would be able to create a very realistic material. So I mean, that's it for now. That's all I wanted to show you. Just a quick little intro to Reflectance. There are many other videos out there which go over this same topic, and a lot of them to you know, in much more detail than I just did here. But I just started using this too, and I just thought I'd share what I know so far. So thank you for watching. I hope you learned something new, and I will see you in the next tutorial.